Right, does it say I'm recording?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming to listen on this really hot day. And we are just going through these Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations. And we have done quite a few, but today we're actually, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to jump to, see if I can get it to go forward, to number 12. And this one's called Responsible Consumption and Production. And I think it is very relevant to us in early years because we can do this, certainly consumption bit responsibly, not so much the production because we don't actually make stuff to resell, but so we'll focus more on the consumption than anything else. And I like this. When I went onto the internet, I found this illustration, and I really like that because I think we are responsible for what we buy, aren't we? Some people think then perhaps not, or that they've got no choice as to what they buy. And sometimes people don't have a choice because you might be on such a tight budget, you can only get what you can. But I think we do have choices, and that we don't have to buy stuff all the time. And I think that comes through with this goal. So what I was planning to do for the next half an hour or so is go over exactly what there is on SDG 12, look at some of the facts and figures that I was able to find, look at how we can play our part in this, share some ideas, consider what responsible consumption looks like with children and also with families and the community. So this is the goal, split into all its targets, and we'll just go through them, considering which of these we can work on. So the first one is implementing a 10-year sustainable consumption and production framework. And I'm going to jump that because the 10 years is pretty much up anyway. And it includes all the production stuff, which is not relevant for us. So I'm not going to dwell on that one. The next one is sustainable management and use of natural resources. Now that one we can think about, because by natural resources, we're thinking about things like fossil fuels, things that make plastic, water, wood, all those kinds of things. And obviously we do use some of those natural resources in our nurseries. And the next one, also very relevant for us, halve global per capita food waste. Well, maybe not the global bit, but certainly we can work on cutting our food waste in our nurseries, at work and at home. But it does raise the question of how much food waste do we have in the first place? Because you need to know that before you can have a target of cutting it by half. So we'll need to come back to that one. The next one's responsible management of chemicals and waste. Well, we already have our RIDDOR rules and so on for the COSH rules for chemicals, and we do avoid chemicals that damage the environment in our nurseries, such as bleach. We don't use bleach at all. At least I hope we don't. It's one of those things where you have to kind of keep an eye on purchasing to make sure that we're not using toxic chemicals. But certainly, for example, when COVID first hit us, we were using a chemical to clean the air of the virus, and it turned out that it was causing all kinds of coughs in staff. And it was actually quite a nasty chemical that we were using. So it was not only killing the virus, but it was hurting us as well. And so we stopped using that and started using an ionized water that was killing the viruses and being totally harmless. But it's one of those things where you just have to keep a constant eye on it, as people are perhaps attracted by adverts or whatever to a different chemical, just to make sure that it is actually okay to use. And that includes air fresheners, perfumes, as well as the products that we use to clean tables and floors and so on. So it is an ongoing challenge, and particularly as some suppliers are not particularly great at labeling their bottles. But it is covered in our health and safety policy already. So it's just a question of keeping an eye on that. Every time a new chemical is introduced to the nursery or the office, it has to be checked by health and safety, and they do the COSH form, and we can see then whether it's okay or not, potentially. but that doesn't cover perfume. And there are a number of perfumes that we can buy that are pure poison. Same for, you know, deodorants and things like that. So, but we don't really control that as a nursery company. That has to be more of an individual choice than a company-wide, because obviously the company does not buy people's deodorants. Individuals buy their own deodorants. But I do remember we had a problem a few years ago where we had a member of staff that was particularly intolerant to chemicals, and we had to put out a thing to all the hub staff to be aware of what chemicals they were using, because then she would get poorly. So I think this one is ongoing and under communicated in many ways. The next one, with substantially reduced waste. That's obviously really critical, and that's something that we do a lot of work on, trying to make sure stuff goes in general waste or recycled waste or the food waste bins. And it's an ongoing discussion, teaching children what goes in what waste, as well as adults. And I remember we had a disaster a few years ago where we were doing really well with our waste in the office, putting all the right waste in the right bin. But the cleaner we had at that time didn't speak English, didn't understand the communications, and put all the waste in the same bin. So all that work that we'd been doing separating was all for nothing. Accidentally, you know, she didn't do it on purpose. But we ended up putting a lot of recycling into the general waste bin and getting charged for the privilege, because of course you get charged for being overweight when you put stuff in the general waste bin. So that was a disaster, and it could happen at any nursery at any time if they employed somebody who didn't understand what goes in what bin. And indeed, any new member of staff could do that as well. So it needs a constant eye out, and measuring, of course. The next one's quite nice. Encourage companies to adopt sustainable practices and sustainability reporting. So we are doing our own sustainability reporting, but also the accountants law situation, what you have to report under the Companies Act in the UK is mid-changing. They've got some new reporting just for sustainability, which is only going to be hitting the big companies now and smaller companies like ourselves in due course. But it will help to standardize reporting, because at the moment you can report on waste and energy and report per capita or per child or per square meter, and that makes it very, very difficult to compare. Also, different types of product go into different categories. So it could go into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 3 is the kind of general purchasing rather than energy. And that's very misunderstood and misreported, including ourselves, you know, whether we included our dairy milk in scope 3 or not, for example, how we work out what our scope 3 is in regard to buying vegetables and fruits. It can get incredibly complicated, and that makes it expensive. So then people have to decide whether it's worth doing that level of reporting. So, for example, a cabbage has a different carbon footprint to a Brussels sprout. You know, are we really going to differentiate every product when we purchase it for their carbon footprint? In the ideal world, of course you do. But in practice, that information is often not available from the suppliers, in which case we can't do it. But even when it is, it's still a lot of work if we're only ordering a small amount to work out what the figures are. So that area remains a huge challenge. But I think as electronic reporting, as we get smarter IT-wise, this will gradually improve. Because again, if we don't measure stuff, then how can we tell we're reducing? How can we tell what the major impacts are if we don't have the data? Having said that, I've seen lots of nursery managers in practice just cut back in general. So it is possible to improve without the data, but then it's impossible to evidence. So we can encourage our suppliers to make sure they do the reporting for us. And that was part of our B Corp registration, is that we communicate with suppliers to try and make sure they tell us the carbon footprints and are on a journey to provide more information. And we certainly do that. We, you know, keep up the conversation, keep asking the questions, because if we don't ask, they don't think we're interested, and then they don't provide anything. So we need to keep asking, keep commenting, at the risk of sounding a bit like a parrot, because if we don't, they'll take no interest. So every time I go and meet with suppliers, I'm always asking, well, what is your carbon footprint of what? How do you work that out? Can that be compared? Because I've had some very unusual answers. I've had things like, well, the carbon footprint of this particular product is, we've worked it out by the distance as the crow flies from our building to your building. And that's not the carbon footprint of that product. That's the carbon footprint of nothing really at all. You actually want, an actual journey, not a crow fly journey. And with what particular vehicle? And what about the product itself? So that was a particularly woeful answer, but I think just illustrates how companies are on the journey. A few years ago, no one was asking. Now we are asking, and we actually need to know what was used up in terms of resources when they made that product, so that we can then choose. So we look at one, for example, changing map for a baby's carbon footprint is X, and another one is Y, and they're also priced A and B, and then we can make a decision. It doesn't mean we're always going to make the most sustainable decision, because if said baby mat is £100 and we can get one for 10, then we're probably going to still get the 10 one, even though it's not as sustainable as the £100 one, because money is so limited. It's an equation of the climate, but also the money and also the social impact. I mean, also that £100 one might be made by adults being paid a really good money, whereas the £10 one may be made by a child slave, in which case, do you know what? We'd better do without that mat and change some other way, or refurbish what we've got, because certainly as a company, we do not want to be associated or inadvertently buy anything made by slaves, child labor, something that damages a community. But trying to find out those answers is difficult. Companies may not know, they may lie, they may be confused. Do we trust what they say? Or do we double check? Or do we have another company do the double checking? It's not a simple, straightforward answer. So, but we're just going to do our best, because we've got to be pragmatic about this, and to hope that the government and others also intervene to make sure that products made unsustainably, whether that's socially, environmentally, are stopped at source, so that we don't have that option to buy. Hence, they've stopped buying plastic straws. Great. More of that they do, the better, in my opinion. I probably might not be saying the same thing if I was making plastic straws or currently making plastic balloons, because those people need to make something else to make their livelihood. So moving on to 12.7, promote sustainable public procurement. So this is not our buying in the nurseries. This is government and the local authorities, how they're buying things. So although we don't have much influence, we can raise these things with our members of parliament, with our local authorities, and certainly people like the NHS are now moving to far more sustainable policies. And that's great. We should be celebrating that. And I noticed that they are publicly announcing some of these things, which is really good news for us and shows a good example. But for example, one of our nurseries is on an MOD site, and they were using fossil fuels and didn't seem too bothered about the fact that the cabin they were renting to us wasn't insured, it wasn't insulated. And we had to raise this year after year to get some action. And they are now acting on it, and they are now getting us a more sustainable building, and they are now looking at providing us with greener energy. So we will win eventually. It's just whether we can win fast enough to protect the world for our children or not. Okay, so 12.8, promoting universal understanding of sustainable living. Now, we're in a brilliant place to do that, because we're working with over 4,000 children and their families day to day in our group of day nurseries. And obviously other people are working in different day nursery organisations, and they have the same potential. And parents have the biggest incentive in the world for a sustainable lifestyle, because their children will live longer than we do. So whereas we heard the other day that in 40 years, these icebergs in the North Pole will have melted and raised the sea level by substantial amount. Well, I'll be dead in 40 years, but my grandchildren hopefully will still be alive. So I and all parents and grandparents have that amazing incentive to try and do something about sustainability now, in what we can, whether that's at work with what we're manufacturing or technology, or being innovative in bringing new products, or just in the way we run our lives day to day, in terms of not buying stuff we don't need, recycling properly where we can, upcycling, and all those things. So yeah, everyone could do something about this. The next one, 12A, B, and C, are more, those are how we're kind of going to achieve these targets. So it's different things, obviously, depending on what type of job you're with. But from a day nursery point of view, it's about trying to make sure that we are not wasteful, that we purchase our products sustainably, and that we teach our colleagues, ourselves, and the children about being sustainable. And I think that's something that we really can do, and we can continue to improve, and on an ongoing basis. So there you go. That's SDG number 12. And I said I'd give you some facts and figures. And I think this first one, it's about food. And I found it quite devastating, really, that a third of all the food that's produced is wasted. And that's shocking, isn't it? Some of it is obviously wasted after it's harvested, because it's either rotting in the fields, or it's not harvested quick enough, or it's not packaged quick enough. And there's not a lot we can do about that, other than perhaps support with encouraging people to go and help with the harvest. Because of course these days people don't really want to be working in the fields, and days gone by, you know, teenagers in their school holidays and teachers in their school holidays, and actually lots and lots of people would go and spend a couple of months in the summer helping with the harvest. We're kind of separated from the harvest now, aren't we? We still have those long school holidays in schools, but the children don't go and work, the teachers don't go and work to help bring in the harvest anymore. That's why the Scottish summer holiday is earlier than the English one, because there's, or later, or which way around it is it's because it was timed for the harvest. But we've all forgotten that. So now we rely on bringing immigrants in, or temporary visitors into the country, to pick our fruit and vegetables. And that's really detached, but actually a lot of people in this country aren't prepared to work for minimum wage to pick fruits and vegetables. Now, the farmers are looking at alternatives. They're looking at mechanical pickers. They're planting their crops differently to enable mechanical pickers to try and reduce the need for humans to be out in the fields, because so many humans don't like doing it. And I'm as bad as the rest. I also don't volunteer to go and pick stuff in the summer holidays. But we, you know, there's perhaps stuff we can do about that. But what we really can do is try and save the 17% of food rots in our fridges and our cupboards, in our shops, because we buy more than we need to eat. And I think we're probably all guilty of that, some more than others. Or we cook something and then it didn't work out right, and so it gets wasted. In the nurseries, potentially, you know, we've got a really good catering team, and they measure out everything to make sure that we cook and provide the right amount of stuff for the right number of children. But even so, there is some waste, because, you know, maybe a child's not hungry that day. There could be all sorts of reasons for waste. And it's whether that can be reused, or whether it really has to go in the bin. If it does go in the bin, can it still be used to be fed to other animals, or can it be used to make energy? There are options, but it's got to be cost effective to do that. There's no point having, you know, one tiny little jar of food collected by a truck using fossil fuels to take it back and burn it for energy if it's not cost effective. So it has to be like a community thing, or a business thing, where we actually use that waste food. So some of our bigger nurseries and our cooking hubs do have their food collected, and it is used for making energy or for pigs and so on. But the single nurseries with very little waste, they don't, because the local council doesn't provide somewhere that we can. Now, I noticed that in Southbourne, part of Bournemouth, the council collect food waste, but in Poole, the council don't collect food waste. So some of that is down to different local authorities, and I don't know what it's like in your area, but if we don't ask the local authorities to do food waste collection, then they're not going to, are they? So we need to pressurize politically if we want this to improve. And I think that's, if your area doesn't have it, then I would encourage you to contact your local councillor, local politician, and push for this. So if you come out with a little action plan at the end of this presentation, that could be something that you might do. The next one's about moving to energy efficient light bulbs. Now, TOPS has already done that, but if you spot any that haven't been already done, or if you have some at home, then I'd again encourage you to get them changed. They fund themselves in a year, so there's no real excuse for not doing it. I think this 3 planets worth thing is important. This says that if the population carries on growing like it is, and we carry on using natural resources, we'd actually get through 3 planets, 3 worlds worth of natural resources a year, and that's not going to work. And you might have heard there's a day in the year at the moment where we've already used up a world, and it keeps moving earlier. I think it was in about June this year. So we're using about 2 worlds worth of natural resources, leaving our children with no world potentially in the future, because we'll have used up all the natural resources. If we keep digging up the coal and oil, there won't be any in a few generations. So we really need to do something about reducing or changing our current lifestyle so we don't use as much. And us in the Western world are the worst. You know, the Americans, the Australians, the Europeans, we are the worst. We need to learn from people in the global south, where they don't use as much. Perhaps they don't eat as much meat like people in India, or they are just a lot more careful, a lot more thrifty, partly because they need to be, but that's what we need to do as well. And we're also polluting water faster than nature can recycle and purify, and there is going to be a problem with water, and there already is in some countries. But that is another SDG. So although it was covered in this SDG, I'm actually going to skip the water issues because we've already discussed those, and we will again also. So there's a few facts and figures. And I know I've also already referred to Kate Raworth's donut economics as a new way of looking at things. But this certainly does refer to, for example, chemical pollution as being when we're overshooting the world. And so I thought it was worth referring you to her work if you haven't already seen it. And you can see that we are on overshoot in a number of different areas. It changes every year and changes in every different community, but this very much refers to this SDG. So how can we play our part? Well, we can try and reduce our waste, especially food. We can be thoughtful about what we buy. And there are a couple of things that sprung to mind. One is one-use fashion. So many people will have some event and they'll go out and buy something and wear it once. People will go out and buy stuff and not think about what happens at the end of its life. Whereas you can actually go out and buy T-shirts, for example, that when you finish wearing, you send them back to the T-shirt supplier, and then they either resell them or they mush them down and make them into more T-shirts. So at least the resources used are being recycled. And there are quite a few supermarkets. I mean, I think Marks and Spencer's, John Lewis spring to mind, where they collect up products and then recycle them for us. We do that with our batteries and a number of other products where we can return them and then they're recycled by the people that made them or by people that have been appointed by the people that made them to try and conserve resources. And then think about where your products have come from. So if you're going to buy blueberries, for example, and there's a choice of English blueberries or Argentinian blueberries, then at least consider that as part of the decision-making process. And then there's reducing consumption of plastic, which we've all done a lot of work on already in this country. But in some countries, plastic bags are banned, like Costa Rica. So we need to make sure that we're using reusable bags and that we keep reusing them, not that we keep buying new reusable bags and stick them in the cupboard. And then when we go out, we buy another reusable bag because that's just putting up costs and not actually doing a lot. And try and refuse one-use plastic. I was really pleased the other day. I went into a supermarket and found they were selling cucumbers without the plastic wrappings all over them. I thought, yes, I'm going to buy those cucumbers and not the ones that that have the wrappings. And keep your eyes open for recycling that are in the shops that you're using anyway, because then you've not got a special trip for that recycling. So there are just some ideas. I'm hoping that you've got your thinking heads on, and you're going to come up with some that that you know about or you can do as well. Actually, I'm going to go back to that page. While I'm on, has anybody on the call got any suggestions or any examples of ways that you've recycled recently or you would like to recycle recently? Just take yourselves off mute. There are so few people on this call. You're very welcome to talk.
I'm sorry, my camera is playing up. That's why it keeps flicking on and off. So I've kept it off just in case it goes down. I think the biggest frustration I have is food wrapping.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the worst thing ever. And it is constant because you've got food wrapped and it says you can recycle this bit, but you can't recycle this bit. So why do you wrap it in that? I just don't get it. So
yeah.
We do as a family try and if we're getting loose fruit, we just won't put it anywhere. We'll just put it in the basket. We won't.
Absolutely. Take your own way.
Things like that. So I think definitely more conscious about everything within the home. I mean, our recycling bin gets really, really full, and our general waste is very low, which I know it's a bit sad. I do get quite excited about that. I think, oh yes, we are doing something.
Yeah.
But I think food wrapping is one of, and like you say with the cucumbers, it's one of the bit. Why do they need to wrap it in plastic? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, their reasoning, so I'm told, is that they quite often do the wrapping in an oxygen deprived environment with carbon dioxide, so the fruit lasts twice as long as it would do without. And they reckon that less is wasted because of that. So a lot of these wrappings, you think it's just a plastic wrap, but it's not. They've actually got carbon dioxide in there instead of oxygen.
Right.
So then when you open it up, you're releasing all the extra CO2 as well. Yeah, it's really challenging. But that way they reckon they can sell more of it because it doesn't rot before you buy it. And as soon as you get it home and open up, then it rots. Sometimes super quickly. Yeah. If you've bought it in a wrapping like that. Much better, as you say, to buy fruit that's unwrapped, buy it from farms. And if you see little stores by the side of the road selling the strawberries or whatever they just picked, then that is the best because it's local, unwrapped. No one's pumped carbon dioxide into the wrapping. You're not wasting plastic.
And also it's the go on, Sam. Sorry,
Sandy. My camera's not working either, so I can't tell if something's awful. I've put a ticket into ECEC. No, I was just going to say I started growing my own cucumbers this year.
Brilliant.
And, when I want one, I just go outside and pick one, and they are huge. So and easy, really easy to do. I would just say so. The only thing is my other half complains that my vegetables are very unsightly in the garden, but which I get, they are. They're very scruffy. But I've got an arch, and I planted a cucumber arch this year and grew the cucumbers over the arch to try and make them look less unsightly. But yeah, it's great. I was so proud of myself. It's
you should be. That's
a
really
win.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we were all doing that, growing for Britain in the war should now be growing for Britain sustainability wise. Because it doesn't take that long, does it? But it does require some skill, and it does require some space, and it does require
patience,
some
I think, as well.
Patience. Yeah.
The only thing I've had to do really is water them, but I don't grow them from seed because I don't have the patience. So I just go to Stewart's and I bought 3 cucumber plants and planted them by an arch and then just watered them with the water butt.
Yeah.
It was honestly that easy. I would say if you're going to try anything, try those, because it's actually really convenient to be able to go outside and get one. They take up hardly any space. So
Brilliant. I mean, all nurseries could do that too, couldn't they? They've got
yeah,
any land, put an arch in, grow their own cucumbers, chop it up and then eat it.
yeah.
What could be more sustainable? So yeah, stunning. Really good. Well done, Sam.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, very impressed. Excellent.
Also, it's the local shops, like the corner shops, they always ask you if you want a bag, and it's not a reusable bag, and it's like, I'm just buying some milk, I really don't need a bag. So it's about thinking through that. Okay, yes, it might be harder, it's convenient to carry your stuff home in a bag, but usually if you go to a corner shop, you're only buying one or two little things. So but they
Indeed.
always offer you a plastic bag, always.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never known them not.
we're looking at welcome pack for new staff, and we've put everything in a tote bag that says top, so that people can reuse it. So if we can get people using those, that'll be brilliant. So, and they're lovely. They look absolutely lovely. So,
and you just have to fold them up and stick them in your handbag
yeah,
or your wallet or whatever, your bum bag or whatever you carry around. Stick one in your car, and you've always got a bag. So,
yeah.
yeah, then you don't need to ask for anything, and that's certainly what I do. Although I have been seen walking out of shops with a pile of things in my hands, not in a bag, which is not perfect, but I'd rather that than have a plastic bag. So yeah, I think if everyone just does what they can, you know, that will really help. I had a look at what TOPS are doing, and I'm not going to read this out because that'll be a bit tedious for you. But seeing Sandy's on the call, how are we doing with actions following the ESOS report? Anything on there that comes that we can
No,
reduce?
I do need to, we do need to have a meeting about that, but we can discuss that in the sustainability meeting in September about our actions, about what we are going to do, because of course that's kind of out of my control, but I have some ideas. So but Andrew needs to be on that call, and
some of it needs investment,
Diane does, and yes, some of it will do. But I think we've done so well. It's amazing, and it's like you look at it and you think, what more can we do? But there is still loads more we can do, and I think it's tapping into the natural resources that we've got, you know, solar, wind power, that sort of thing, more than we do. But that obviously is investment that's needed. So yeah.
Thank you. The battery recycling is an interesting one, because obviously we don't encourage, or we try and prevent our nurseries from buying new batteries that aren't rechargeable. But I had to get a battery the other day for a key that had one of these button batteries, which I know are terribly dangerous for children. But all car keys have got them, haven't they? And I haven't seen any of those that are rechargeable, nor have I seen a machine that recharges button batteries. Is anyone else?
No, I don't think I have.
No, so that's
never.
And I use loads more of them than I've ever used, because they air tags and things like that now.
They are. We're seeing a lot of those around. Yeah, so I think we've got a bit of a challenge there. But if anyone hears of any way of recycling button batteries, or recharging button batteries rather, that would be great. Obviously, the fewer toys we have in the nursery and bits of equipment that have those, the better, because they're such dangerous things in case a child eats one. So I think that's an ongoing issue. But other than that, I know there's a huge box of batteries that goes regularly back to be recycled. And I picked up a big bag from one of the nurseries last week and brought it back to the hub to recycle. So I think that's a fairly easy one, but that's also available in many shops as well. And we're doing a lot of sharing of coats and books and boots and toys and all that kind of stuff. I think that's going reasonably well, and a lot of our nurseries are really helping parents to share what has already been bought, and the more of that we see, the better. We've got a lot on our KPIs. I find that always really interesting. I know we sometimes have to buy one-use gloves and bin bags, because sometimes a member of staff has to wear a glove because they've got an open cut on their hand, or there's an allergy to something or whatever. So I don't think that buying some one-use gloves is avoidable, and perhaps bin bags as well, because if you don't buy a bin bag, sometimes it can be difficult to transport the general waste. But you can do it, but you just have to clean the bin when you empty it. I don't know, is anyone here using bin bags for general waste? Or are you just tipping it into the general bin outside?
It's straight in the bin.
Yeah, I think you can put it straight in the bin. As long as you don't put food waste in your general waste bag, then it should be dry. As soon as it's got food on it, then it gets stuck inside your bin, and it's horrid to clean, and it's a real nightmare. But it does mean you clean it first.
Newspaper to wrap, because we don't have food waste in Plymouth, food waste collection.
Yeah.
But instead of black bags, I wrap any food waste in paper if I can do.
Yeah.
Can be difficult with some items, but yeah.
Yes, because we don't buy newspapers so much anymore, do we? Or magazines, but sometimes you'll have junk mail that you can use for it, I guess. But then the paper doesn't get recycled.
No, yeah.
It's like which is the worst, you kind of got to weigh up the pros and cons, haven't you, really? I think.
Yeah, and keep complaining to Plymouth, because I think Plymouth is one of the worst. When you walk around Plymouth, it's one of the muckiest cities. People just seem to dump their bottles and plastic trash in the street. I think they need to do some work on it. Teach a bit of respect as well. And if we teach people young, then they wouldn't dream of throwing stuff in the street. And obviously we need to just keep on with our own policies and procedures to firstly enable our colleagues to make sustainable choices, and then support them when they do, or pull them up when they don't. It would really help if people like Ofsted would criticise people that weren't sustainable. But even though the DFE say that it's important, it's not been considered important enough to get onto the Ofsted inspection framework, which is something I keep plugging on about. And one day they will listen, because they've done it in Scotland and Wales, so why not England? But I need everybody.
It's funny, Cheryl. It's funny, Cheryl, you saying that, because I looked at an Ofsted report recently, and I can't remember whether it was for the B Corp or ESOS, and I was really surprised that sustainability wasn't mentioned on there at all. So that that's quite interesting that you say that. It's just nowhere. So
it's really sad, isn't it?
That was a bit of a shock. Yeah. I was quite shocked actually.
Well, I've had some Ofsted inspectors comment positively on children using the bamboo toothbrushes and using recycling and stuff, but you don't get any marks for that, as it were. It doesn't help you with your grading, and it's not on the framework at all, so they actually shouldn't be commenting on it at all. And it needs to be, and same with ESOS. It's just extraordinary, really. But I'll keep plugging away at it, and I just ask everybody else to do the same. Every time you have the opportunity to plug away at an MP or a councillor or the DFE, then please do. Because they won't listen if it's just me, but if we all do it, they will, maybe. So we do a lot, but we could always do more. We just need to be pragmatic and don't beat ourselves up when we're not perfect, because we'll never be perfect with humans. But we can certainly keep on trying, keep on finding easy ways of doing it, include it in all our decisions and all our training. And I think we're already one of the best in the country. I just want to stay the best in the country.
Cheryl, at some point, as we're doing these sort of every other month of learning, would it be possible to look at some of the more technical bits, like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, what's in and what's not, and the new reporting? Because I kind of don't have the language to talk to people about what we've accomplished and what we've got yet to accomplish.
Okay.
So I know that we're aiming for scope 3, but I have no idea what that involves.
So scope 3 is everything that isn't energy, basically. So it's all our purchasing policies,
Right.
Whether that's meat, dairy, toys, plastic, wooden, whatever we buy is all in scope 3. as is travelling travelling to work by staff in their own vehicles, because that's not us buying the electricity, that's them buying their petrol or whatever, and then of course it hits us because we're paying them expenses. So that's scope 3, whereas stuff we buy directly is scope 1 and scope 2, gas and electricity, you know, that we're seeing on our own bills. Gas we're actually burning, scope 1. Electricity we're buying it off somebody else, so scope 2. Pretty much everything else is scope 3, and that's the one that's very difficult to measure, because, you know, how do you know what the carbon footprint is of a chunk of venison or beef or lamb? You know, unless the supplier can tell you. But all the tables are on the government website, so you can work it out approximately generalized, but that doesn't take into account anything specific that suppliers might have done to improve. It's just an average. Same with nappies.
So I say to people, we're carbon zero in scope 1
and 2.
And 2. So that's the language I need to sort of, but not yet in scope 3.
Scope 3 we're trying. You know, the bits that we measure we're offsetting, but
and what about like where landlords provide gas and electricity?
We still include that in our scope 1 and scope 2.
Right, even though it's outside of our control.
Even though it's outside of our control, yeah. And that's assuming that we can actually tell how much we've used. But what the accounts department are doing is if they don't give us the meeting readings or the exact ones, then we approximate it based on the same size nursery outside, as it were.
Right. So I had completely the wrong idea about what scope 1, 2, and 3 was.
But it is confusing.
I thought they were grades like ABC, like okay. That's really helpful. Thank you.
That's all right.
It's some of those technical things that, is really helpful. I know it's a silly question when we've been talking about it for a while, but when you never actually sort of had it defined, it's really helpful to hear those basics sometimes.
Absolutely. There is actually quite a lot online as well. If you look up scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, so that they can explain it, because it can be complicated. But basically, scope 1s are direct greenhouse emissions that occur from sources controlled or owned by an organization, such as emissions associated with fuel combustion in boilers, so it's gas basically, furnaces and vehicles.
Yeah.
And then the scope 2 is kind of secondhand stuff, so where somebody else has provided it, and then we're still paying for it. But it is
that would be landlords then. Yeah,
could be landlords, cars, but even electricity suppliers can come into scope 2. So indirect emissions from consumption of purchased electricity, heat or steam. So generally all the gas stuff is scope 1, electricity is scope 2, and everything else is scope 3.
And what about where people are using power at home to work from home? Is that's externalized to us?
So we don't actually account for that at all, do we? Because they would need to do that themselves.
Right.
So we're not including that. We could do an approximate for it. But yeah, that would come on. Well, they could even be getting scope 1 and scope 2 from home like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, where people are working at home, that is something we're not doing, and perhaps we should. So for everybody working at home, we should add a little bit on.
I think Andrew felt it was really difficult to do because of people having different energy suppliers and things like that.
Oh, really hard, yeah. So all we can really do is encourage people to have suppliers that, like our gas supplier is 0 now in terms of carbon footprint, because it's gas from renewable supplies rather than burning fossil fuels. Yeah. And B, they offset it themselves. Like our waste, all our waste is already offset by the waste supply that we use. You have to pay more for that, but it's already offset. But again, there's, to what level they're offsetting it, is it accurate? There's definitely space in there for greenwashing,
Yeah.
where people
Yeah.
say it's one thing, but then they're underpaying to correct it if they are correcting it. It is, I mean, even the way we offset through ecology, they're externally assessed, but we're still trusting that they are offsetting by saving energy because they do projects. For example, they'll put solar panels or something into a unit in Zambia or Ghana or somewhere, and then we get the benefit of that. And we're using that as offsetting, but we're trusting that their figures are right.
Yeah.
And there's actually a market now in offsetting, and there's lots of people who don't like that at all and say it's not properly representative, and it's also greenwashing. So it's definitely not straightforward. Which really kind of, that's one part of our job, but the other part is just to try and do the grow the cucumbers in the garden thing. So I was thinking then, well, how can we improve what we do already? And the first thing really is just to talk about it. So what we're doing now is just discussing the challenges, making the improvements that we can, because one person on their own has not got the answers. But when you get together as a group, you might well come up with some suggestions, and we can make sense of what's going on a bit more in a group. And sometimes there's some herd mentality, and we'd all jump off the cliff together, which we don't want to do that either. But I think that's where people using their critical thinking and teaching children critical thinking can really help us work out what to do for the best, bearing in mind we might change what we do the next year when we learn more and we improve more. Just making time for ourselves. So when we're purchasing, I mean, sometimes when I'm buying stuff, I've noticed it when I'm buying stuff for my new flat. Sometimes you just run out of time and you just think, well, that will have to do, and I'll just do that. And I totally sympathize with our managers doing that, because they're so time short and stressed. So, they know they've run out of toilet paper. They need to make a decision really fast. Now, hopefully we've made it as obvious and as easy for them as possible with toilet paper. But there might be something else that the member of staff wants really urgently, and ideally they need time to think about it, to do their purchasing as thoughtfully as possible. And maybe we need to think about that in terms of regional managers and directors. What can we do to enable our managers to have that bit of time to reflect, or we do the thinking for them, so it's really straightforward. So there's a whole long list of products that are really easy to order because we've already done the research for them and worked it out. So I think a combination of those two would really help, because there's so much to learn, isn't there? There's so much knowledge to get into our heads about making sustainable choices. The obvious one is when something's biodegradable, does that make it a good decision? No, it doesn't, because the word biodegradable is garbage. It's just so overused and so generalized that that your laptop's biodegradable, apparently. Well, of course it's not in anything under about 500 years, but maybe it would biodegrade into microplastics over 1,000 years. Doesn't make it biodegradable, but some suppliers are calling them biodegradable. Ditto, almost everything we use. So if you see the word biodegradable, just mentally put a line through it. Doesn't mean anything. If, on the other hand, you see the word home compostable, then it certainly does mean so. That means it will compost in your garden to something that's not toxic over a reasonable period of time, not 500 years in your lifetime anyway, or could be less. But there are so many decisions like that, so much information in which plastic is which. They've all got numbers on the back. Do you know which number will be recycled by your local bin company? Because a lot of them, if you see like the 7 on a recycle on the back, you'll find that your local tip does not recycle 7s, only 1s, 2s, and 3s. That's just for example. But unless you know that your recycling is actually recyclable locally, it won't be recycled, even though it's recyclable. It will be in the huge pile of unrecyclable stuff that either gets burned or put into landfill. And what they recycle changes from one year to the next as well, including going backwards as well as forwards. So it is a really big area, and we just need to share what we learn, when we learn it, very localized. So there's no point me sharing what I know about Bournemouth, Christchurch and Pools recycling, because that won't apply if you're living in Plymouth or Portsmouth or Havant or, you know, any of the other areas you can think of. I think role modeling is really important. There's no point us telling our colleagues or asking our learners or our children or our parents to do stuff that we're not prepared to do ourselves. But that doesn't mean we have to do everything. So I think some people are good role modeling at one area, other people are good at role modeling another area, and I think that's okay. Ideally, use the data to research and improve, but sometimes you can just improve without any data, as I've seen from our nursery managers. You know, they make decisions that are more sustainable from the gut, from the heart, rather than from the numbers, and that's better than not doing the decisions. Anyone else got any suggestions or things that they've seen for how we can improve, either in TOPS or Aspire? Or personally even, like the cucumbers. Anyone here going to grow cucumbers now next year? Or anything else? Speak now. Oh, Sam, I can see you coming on.
Sorry, that's my naughty dogs.
Okay, I'll move on, but I think I'm hoping this is something that we can share at the EOT Colleague Council, kind of stick sustainability on their agenda on a regular basis, just to give them the time to learn, to understand more, you know, to create solutions for us and for the children and for our teams. Obviously, I don't control the Colleague Council, but it's just a suggestion, if possible, for them to add it as a normal agenda item, like we do for board and regional managers and so on as well.
Yeah, I'll take that action to put it on the agenda for them.
Thank you. Just that all these a tiny change can make such a big difference. Has anyone got any? I just want to give you another chance. Any ideas or any innovations that they've learned about that they'd like to share? Maybe as suggestions. Oh, I went back with myself. Anyone got anything that they would like to contribute to the group? Nope. Okay, moving on then. So how about with children? What can we do to encourage responsible consumption? I think encouraging them to be creative, so giving them open-ended resources, because there's no doubt that they are going to have to be creative in the future. So the more we can give them that opportunity, the better. Making resources with them. We've been doing this for years, making, you know, like a train out of cardboard boxes type of thing. So that we're using what other people consider to be waste to make toys and equipment and role modeling stuff with them. This avoids buying stuff that has a limited purpose, and it keeps the budget down as well. So these you know, will really help all round as an all-win situation. Work with nature's resources, so we're talking fir cones, shells washed up on the beach, sand, mud, stones, petals, all these kinds of things. Stop us buying stuff and stop the demand for creating more stuff to buy. Teaching them about waste, you know, what goes in what bin, trying to reduce waste. And of course, sharing. Now, sharing is something all children struggle to learn because everything's kind of self-centered when they're 1 and 2, the early 2s. But teaching them to share with each other, both in play, but also in terms of when they've grown out of something, passing it on to somebody else. This is such a lovely thing to get into, but it does need teaching. Small children, initially, their toys are them. And so you'll cause an immense affront by you know, taking a child's toy away from them. So we don't do that. Just encouraging them to share. And the day nursery is a perfect place to do that. We can teach them with our water butts by measuring water and using that instead of using it out of the tap. Unfortunately, we don't have many children practitioners on the call at the moment. So I'm not able to draw on that. But you might have some that you use at home or ideas that you have from grandchildren or nephews and nieces and stuff like this, that you can use. Anyone got any suggestions? Growing as well, growing plants and things that you can use, mud kitchens, all sorts of ideas there. Play shops, teaching them about how you buy and barter an actual shop, more recirculating things, just talking about resources, where things come from. You know, because small children will think that apples come from the supermarket. They won't realize they come off the tree unless you show them. All the science activities and maths, engineering type activities will help start them off on that journey so that they can be more innovative and creative as adults and create scientific solutions to some of these problems. And collaborative work, so they're building things together, will help them learn how to do these things in the future. There are some great videos as well online that you can watch to learn about SDG 12. These are just a couple of examples. A lot of them are pitched a little bit old, but definitely worth watching them with an adult so they can discuss what they've seen and go a little bit further into some of the words. Because like us struggling over scope 1, scope 2 and so on, they don't need to know that. But there are other words that will just be completely new to small children, including the word recycling. And this will help start that vocabulary up and start them discussing things. I also think it's good for our apprentices, students, volunteers, and staff that haven't yet learned a bit more about sustainability to watch these with the children. Then they're learning together, and there's no shame in that at all. There are a few books. Neil Layton, who's our local author, now living on the Isle of Wight, where he moved from Southsea, has written a number of great books about sustainability. And there are a couple more examples. I quite like that idea. Do you need it or you want it when you're thinking about buying something or trying to get something? And of course, taking our children to the local farms to pick their own or to see where it's coming from, tremendously helpful. Children can make lemonade and sell that to parents. So all kinds of things we can do to encourage children to get closer to the land, closer to the growing the food that we need, and closer to animals as well. With parents, it's not for us to preach at all. But what we can do is encourage them by asking them for unwanted items. You know, whether perhaps we want a new table for the nursery, perhaps we can ask for donations, chop some of the legs off to make them the right height for children rather than buying new tables. We can ask them to bring stuff in for junk modeling, whether that's yogurt pots, cardboard boxes, you know, paper towel rolls, all those kinds of things, used wrapping paper that we can cut up, used graph paper, all those kinds of things, tremendously useful. We shouldn't really be needing to buy much in the way of paper or cardboard or whatever, because most parents have got more than they want at home that they could bring in. We can share our policies and procedures so they can see what we're doing, perhaps share it not just in paper but in little mini clips, you know, very, very short videos, or using social media to share things that we're doing. Signposting them on success, to how to save energy. Again, try and make it enjoyable and entertaining and useful. And an important one is to also learn from the older generations, because people in their 70s, 80s and 90s lived in a time when they did recycle everything. And they've got lots that they can learn. And speaking to, you know, my mum the other day, I asked her when I was potty trained, for example. Oh, you were out of nappies by 18 months. And that was general. And that's nothing to do with children's ability to be potty trained. That's all to do with adults' ability to potty train us, so that we don't use these one-use nappies any more than we absolutely have to. But that's not the only thing the older generations have got to teach us. You know, they've got lots to teach us about cooking and planting sustainably and reusing stuff that we'd do well to listen more to that generation than perhaps we do. Now, as part of our OMEP, we also need to think about children that aren't in Europe, children in the global south, where typically they don't use as much stuff anyway. But how are we going to do that? And as we partner up with nurseries in the Global South, it's the same as the other SDGs, really, just asking about what they need. Can we do something specific? Is there something that they can use that we don't want anymore? You know, maybe our old mobile phones or laptops that still work, but we want or we have to use the new generation because of data protection or whatever. Or is there anything we can do to raise issues for them when we're talking to our politicians as well? So, you know, anything you think of there, or anything that we learn through conversations, then please do feel free to share them with colleagues and nurseries so that we can help, you know, whether they're pen pals or otherwise. So just to summarize,
just going back to that other slide, have we got a list anywhere that we could distribute about which nurseries we have actually paired up with?
We do have a list. It is on the S Drive, and I can send you a link to that after the meeting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Still in its infancy. So I know Copner, for example, definitely got one. And some of the others have been provided with lists, but not necessarily made a choice yet. But yeah, there is a list, and we continue to work on it as well. But yeah.
Are you happy for me to put that on the Facebook page? Is that all right? Like we could?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that'd be fine. Good. So just to summarize, we've been talking about SDG number 12, called responsible consumption and production. And we've looked at it from all different perspectives. We've looked at some of the national, international figures and facts. We've looked at it from a staff and an EOT perspective, a little bit from the children's perspective, parents and community, and finally the Global South. And I hope you've all got a little bit of an action plan as to what you can do personally, whether it's to improve yourself, to role model things you do, just to share or enable meetings so that we can progress and go forward. And that is the end of what I was going to say. Anyone got any questions or further comments? Tiny little meetings. I think one of the things is whether we can invite or do this differently to either get more people or to maybe we need to change the format. As you know, I'm more than up for changing the format if that helps. Anyone got any suggestions, or they could just email me as well, either through cheryl.hadland@hadlandcaregroup.co.uk or through gecko@gecko.org.uk. Okay.
Yeah, because we did put times in of these meetings that were what the majority of the managers were okay with, like the 1 to 2 kind of slots. But we did get a few at one point, but that kind of tailed off. We just need to be more. There needs to be more communication potentially.
I think so. Yeah.
To remind them. Yeah.
But at least it's recorded, so people can listen if they want to.
Yeah.
But perhaps we need marketing to help a bit more, or we need to change the format. You know, if people don't want to do it in this format, then we need to do it a different way, which is fine by me. Okay, but meanwhile, we will go back to doing 9 in 2 months' time unless anyone says anything different. Thanks everybody for coming, and have a really good rest of your week and rest of the summer.
Thank you. Thank you. Insightful and great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.